I guess the first question I have for you, you look at all the mandates or suggestions that we stay away from bars, that we stay away from mass gatherings, even prisoners and people in jail, they're trying to come out early due to COVID-19.
Yep.
Yet we are going to start school in session, in class soon. Break down the logic to me with that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. We do need to get kids back in school, or at least back becoming educated. And I think if we've learned that schools are much more than just about teaching and learning, but it's also the fabric of our society. It's nutrition, it's socialization, it's mental health. So it's a delicate balance, and every state's doing it different, even within school districts and within a state. It's going to be done different. And I think we just have to, and I use the word cautiously, experiment to come up with really what the best plan is.
Is it really possible to do so safely, though? Not only keeping students safe, but you look at all the educators, some of which may be at risk or may be up there in age, and they may be more prone to
Right.
contract COVID-19.
There's no way that you can mitigate the risk down to zero. There will always be a risk going forward. And you and I were talking about earlier, we do not know when this will peak. We don't know if it'll be in year 1, 2, 3, 4 that this will peak. And I'm not saying that to be scary or anything, but we just don't know what the biology of this organism is going to be yet. But the practices put in place, what we call engineering adjustments, meaning where are desks, where are chairs, how is air handled, how close, how far, masks or no masks, all those things work. The trouble is that people don't practice those kind of safety measures with great regularity.
So how can we do so in schools? Or is that something, again, that the district may have to?
Yeah, you would hope that there'd be more compliance with a limited number. And, people who go to bars are not the same as those that go to the third grade. I trust the third graders more than I trust the people that are laughing and drinking in bars, because they're going to be more likely to spread it. But you're absolutely right. Matter of fact, even this summer throughout this summer with daycare and some classes going on in some schools, we've seen a few clusters related to educational facilities even this summer. I'll say 45 cases that have emerged, and all but about 5 of those were in 18 to 76-year-olds. So it wasn't necessarily the smallest in the children that were getting sick, it's adults.
Let's suppose a classmate or even a teacher in that classroom tests positive, for that matter. A lot of parents are concerned. What should they do? What should they know?
Well, I think what they should, first off, they should know and have the information when it becomes available. That's not a dirty little secret. If somebody tests positive for it, it's the obligation that the parents know what's going on. Much like, I think, if a person became ill in a nursing home, I think that ill nursing home patient, their family should know. So I think it's really important that we share information, number one. But secondly, I think that the person has to just follow the rules, stay home, get better. And the question will come up is what happens to the contacts of that, let's say, a teacher that has become ill. But if they have done things right with the masks and with the distancing and hand washing, the risks are relatively small to that individual. And I might use this one case, not in a school, but in Springfield, Missouri, there was that hair cutting place that had 2 ill women that were hair cutters. One was there for 6 days working ill, and one was there for 8 days working ill. They had 165 clients that came in. The 2 hair cutters that were ill with COVID-19 had masks on. 165 out of 165 of their patrons came in, had masks on. There was not one single case of disease transmitted from those 2 individuals that were known to be infected, or later known to be infected, to those 165 patrons. Masks work.
Based on your expertise, then, is it safer, or will it be safer in a school setting than it is in a jail or a meat packing plant?
Right.
Or even a church, for that matter?
I think so. And again, I think it's to the degree that they pull it off well with those protective measures. But even with those other settings you mentioned, we've learned a lot about prisons and have done a great job. Department of Corrections has done a great job. Are they still getting infected? They're bringing it in from the community into prisons. We have 7 correctional facilities right now that have at least 1 positive case. But those cases are coming from community. So we basically find the people, test them, isolate and quarantine, and then come back and do a second round of testing. Works great. Meatpacking plants have metamorphosized into something that's different And again, we had OSHA, we had the CDC out to, and we didn't, as a state, you may not know this, but we were, I think, the only state that has meatpacking plants that weren't shut down. And 30% of the beef, for example, comes out of Kansas. And the hit on the economy, way of life, and people want to work. So we did the same measures we were just talking about with spacing, screening for illness symptoms, and changed their breaks so they're not congregating all at one time with breaks, but they would take smaller breaks. And it worked dramatically well. Has it gone to zero? No. Will it go to zero anytime soon? I don't think it will go to zero anytime soon. But the containment effort has been really strong.
So how many times do we need to test before we can say, man, I'm out of the clear? We talked earlier, and there's a sports organization that's mandating its players test negative 3 times before they're allowed into their training facilities. For the average Joe person watching, how many times should they test negative before they think they're in the clear?
You can never relax, because where did 3 come from? Why wasn't it 2 or 9? You can't, practically speaking, 350 million Americans, we can't test somebody every 5 days, every American every 5 days, so as to put in lockdown everybody that's ill. I mean, in an ideal world, that would be great. But then what happens is that the more you do asymptomatic people and just screening like that, that it puts a terrific amount of pressure on the laboratories, because if you get somebody that's symptomatic and you aren't getting their test result back for 8 days, that's not a very good decision-making matrix, if you will. By that time, they're probably better. And you haven't quarantined and isolated the ones that you really needed to. So I favor being smart about testing symptomatic people and then being very aggressive with our protection measures. But people have to suck it up and say, for 28 days, we can get really serious about this. And because that's 2 incubation periods, and 28 days is going to be a blink of an eye. And we just need to really hunker down and do this right. Do we have to close businesses again? I don't think so. Do businesses, should they have a thing on the door that says no, you have to wear a mask? Yeah. Should people be told they need to wear a mask? No. They should wear a mask because they understand it. And by the way, you and I are sitting here. We're socially distanced, a big palatial studio with great air handling. That's why we're not in masks, and we're still following the rule, because we're using our head, we're applying our principles that we know. And if we couldn't control the environment, then we would have our mask on doing this. I believe in it.
Let's fast forward to that, because there's a large contingency of folks that, to mask or not to mask. Some folks think it's a detriment, especially if I have asthma or if I have some other condition, or even if I don't, I'm breathing in some toxic chemical. There are people who say this, who believe this, who think that it's actually more harmful, doing more harm than good to do that. What would you tell those people?
Well, I think that they are probably quoting something that is driven by something other than facts, because masks work. That's been asked and answered probably since the 1500s, when bubonic plague was sweeping Europe in 1527, and ever since then. I've worn masks for 42 years, and I've taken care of a lot of patients in that period of time, and people are not becoming ill. Now, there are a few people who just can't wear masks, but mostly because of psychiatric issues or claustrophobia and that kind of thing. Our Jerome Adams, Vice Admiral Jerome Adams, our U.S. Surgeon General, himself asthmatic and a very brittle asthmatic as a kid, has come out very strongly supporting the use of masks. And mostly people using it as an excuse to not wear a mask, and it's faulty ideology.
Clear this up for me, though, because in March, Jerome Adams said the exact opposite. A lot of leaders said the exact opposite. We don't need masks right now.
Right. That it was a confusing message early on, partly contributed to by the CDC, that said routine people don't need masks. I think a couple things. One is there weren't enough masks, and anybody that was wearing a mask that really wasn't at the highest risk was depriving somebody in a medical setting, a first responder, et cetera. So it was a zero-sum game in terms of how many masks that were available out there. But it was confusing to say you don't need to wear a mask, because it won't be that additive in terms of the protection was wrong. But it was said because of the fact we didn't know how wildly infectious this is. And you've seen those sneezing videos and everything, pretty dramatic. And those droplets, they just don't drop instantly. So that's the rationale to say, yeah, we probably didn't take as aggressive as a stance as we should have early on, and we're playing catch up because of that.
How wildly infectious is it, as you mentioned?
Yeah, it's I think that probably you can walk into a room where somebody was, but they're not there now, but they had just left. And I think if you're in there unmasked, you can get it. I worry about elevators, about the infectious disease risk due to elevators. Even in my office building in Topeka, 5 floors, you're getting on, you're closer than 6 feet, you're far less than 10 minutes unless the elevator would stall. But think about those, like Chicago with 70-story office buildings. You're parked in there for a long time with people. And so what I say to people is always have a mask if you can't control your environment. Because you don't know when you might be fine standing there now, but somebody comes up right next to you, put on a mask.
Let's go back to the schools for a little bit. How might contact tracing work with districts, especially when you talk about HIPAA policies?
Yeah, what we are trying to do is encourage the school districts to have where everybody opts in for contact tracing, because it does protect them. Number one but the information has to be held discreetly. We put it in. We have in Kansas what's called EpiTracks, which is our epidemiology tracking. It is HIPAA compliant. It is a contained database, and we have privacy top of mind. But in public health emergencies and public health crises, it's always a little bit of a delicate balancing act. If you're not trusting somebody over there that's not is not making good judgments, am I, as a state health official, willing to inconvenience their life by having them mandatorily quarantined? Right. Yeah, I am. And do we have to do that very often? No, because usually it happens with tuberculosis, happens with mumps and other things on occasion. Usually there's a common sense and a negotiation where you can get where you want to go.
What's the most frustrating part for you as a doctor dealing with all this?
I think probably the most frustrating part is social media, that people kind of weaponize information and deliberately use it against other people or to pick a fight. It really bothers me when, and this is on both sides of the state line. Randall Williams, who's a state health official here in Missouri, a good friend of mine for a long time. Politicians are always going to be dealing with controversy, but people shouldn't be undermining their leaders to make them look bad for political purposes. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Politics and pandemics don't mix well.
Should bars remain open? Should churches remain open? One person told us, well, I can go to the grocery store or even sit down at a restaurant now if I want to. So they kind of said, because of that, bars and restaurants and churches should remain open. Do you think so? And I've been criticized for being hard on churches, and in reality, I'm hard on gatherings of any kind. I'll answer in a second. Do I go to a restaurant and eat? And yeah, I have. I probably a couple nights a week will go. But do I walk into any restaurant if I think it doesn't look right? No, I'll back out and say some other day. But as long as the setting is like this, staff and are doing the proper things, surfaces are cleaned before my very eyes, then I think you can safely do that. I think people can. I do worry a little bit about churches because there's a lot of singing, and that those things spread the virus. There's no question about it. I favor online church, and if there's a few people that are going to spread out and have all the room in the world there, and not a lot of exhortations and things, they probably can do that safely. But I think they'd be safer worshiping from home. Testing is up nationwide, like 40% nationwide. And a lot of people think case counts are up because testing is up. Break that down to me. Is there truth in that, or is there another side to the story that I'm missing?
Yeah, it's just, it seems logical, but it is not true. And the reason is, with increasing testing, if the number of positive cases really out there were either leveled off or dropping, then the percentage of positive tests would drop down to a very low number. But as we're doing more testing, the percentage of positive tests are going up. So I call that the burden of disease. There's just a lot more disease out there than there was. So we're getting upwards towards 10% of testing is positive. It's just more illness. And I think, for some reason, I think that argument, it does make sense, but it also is used to discredit the decision making. You asked me earlier what's the most frustrating thing. And again, it's, we get smarter every day, But we don't know everything about this virus. And it's awfully easy to be a Monday morning quarterback or an armchair epidemiologist and second guess the people that are mostly working really hard to try to keep people safe.
Dr. Norman, have you been talking firsthand with some of those people working to keep us safe, the first responders, some of the nurses, or the people in the hospitals, and what are they saying? Are they concerned? Or?
Yeah, concerned. Matter of fact, I meet with hospital leaders every Tuesday morning and with critical care physician leaders throughout the state every Wednesday morning. Tonight I'm going to be meeting by Zoom with a bunch of the state nursing association, so I stay real close to the caregiving community. I mean, that's, I was a chief medical officer at KU for a long time, and before that in a much larger institution in Seattle. And I've always liked to, I call it staying close to the people that are closest to the bedside, because they're the ones, they're not necessarily taking time out of their day to publish a bunch of stuff, but you call them up and say, hey, I got a couple questions for you. Great, got it. So I like to stay close to the troops,
Why do you think this has become so political?
Well, I think the stakes are high in a election year. On the Kansas side, I'm not familiar with Missouri politics, but on the Kansas side, every state representative and senator is up for election this year. We have obviously a very high profile and contentious presidential election. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And COVID-19 has so captured everything in the news, nobody knows that better than you, and the stakes are incredibly high. People are losing jobs and they're losing their livelihood, and there's no way that makes people feel good.
Most accurate forecast from meteorologist Jeff Penner.
We got it now. All right, earlier, you said, I want to say a few weeks ago, communities have fumbled the ball on keeping the numbers down. Explain.
Yeah, we had, I think, and still in looking back at it in the Kansas side, the phased-in reopening plan that talked about what kind of businesses, what would be the expectations when they come online, what mass gathering size, and what are the triggers then to move on. We had only 3 metrics, and they've remained good this whole time. Total number of cases, hospitalization, death rates. So what fumbled was, one, when that mandate went out the window, and then secondly, when the mask mandate was undermined, in this case through the Attorney General's office, and left to the localities to make this decision, and everybody's doing it different and unsafely. That's fumbling the ball when we have really had it in the palm of our hands. On May 26th, we reached the low point, and we would have kept going lower and lower, except that as the state went hog wild and opened up again, and off to the races, business as usual. We'll see hundreds of cases related to a couple or 3 bars in one town in 1 week. I mean,
are you noticing a difference between the rural areas and the more populated ones? In terms
Yeah.
of behavior?
Yeah, I think so. I can't make a generalization across broadly. It is harder to capture the minds, I think, of rural Kansans and Missourians who don't see the burden of disease. They're not on a 70-bed COVID-19 unit in the hospital and burying a 20-year-old like happened last weekend. They don't see it firsthand because the case count are low. We do have it in 103 out of the 105 counties, which means that there's been people in those other 2 counties that just have been ill and just never got tested. So that's why it doesn't show up. But I feel like every county has its own personality. County commissioners, some that really run the county government, have their own views and their own politics. And quite honestly, I think the best interest of their residents at heart, particularly when it comes to schools and employment. But on May 26th, and we predicted everything right so far. When it was going to peak out, what it was going to take to get there, but then when the rules went out the window on May 27th, and again since then with masks, that's when it started to get sideways. We need to buck down.
Barring any follow-ups, I'll have 4 more questions. In the past, you've talked about 4 preventative measures in particular: testing capacity, rapid case investigation, aggressive contact tracing, isolation, and quarantine. These 4 alone, Can this help flatten the curve, if you will, and get us back to some sort of normalcy?
Yeah, if we do that well, we could make the cases go down to single-digit numbers instead of, like I said, just since Friday, we've had over 1,000 new cases just since Friday to today. We could get down to single digits in 28 days if we really did this aggressively. Now, it's not compatible with what people think that their normal life should be like, to be aggressive about wearing masks and social distancing and the like. But we can still do better than we're doing now, by far.
One of those measures, again, contact tracing. Let's talk a bit about House Bill 2016 and how it impacts contact tracing. In your estimate, how does it?
Well, it makes it harder. It kind of derailed, in my estimation, something that was going very, very well, because to have to get consent from everybody goes against the whole idea of contact tracing, because then it delays to have to find people and then get consent to do that. What we'd rather have is just a blanket consent so we can contact and call people. It's not rocket science. You know, we've trained a lot of people to be volunteer contact tracers, and they don't necessarily come from the medical fields. And yet, if we don't have access to a business, for example, or to a person, then we're not going to get the information. So they go off, and then that becomes a whole new outbreak over there, just because we can't talk to the individual. I understand people's privacy needs. I feel that way too. I know people worry about Big Brother and phone devices that are tracking my every movement, and I don't like the kind of the George Orwell kind of Big Brother feel of that. But then again, we haven't had one of these pandemics for a very long time, and we are not doing well with it compared to other countries. Other countries did better at this.
And what are they doing that we aren't?
They're taking it more seriously. I think that they also have a little bit different feel. You know, Americans are ruggedly individualistic. You know, square jaw into the north wind, you can't mess with me. And Europeans, for example, and Asians don't feel that as strongly. There's cultural beliefs and norms that mask wearing is something that's good for the community during a time of an outbreak. And then, of course, Italy is a great example. Very old country. They're in the sense that their average per capita age is much greater than in the United States. And they say, you know, we've been through this before. This isn't our first rodeo, and we know we need to take it very seriously, drive it down as low as can be. I think there's the rugged individualism drives some of the conduct we've been seeing.
How's your son, by the way?
He's well. Matter of fact, it's his birthday today. He got over it. He was really sick for 15 days with it, and but he's young and resilient, and he did well. So yeah, it's just touched my family too. I mean, both with my son, and then my daughter is a single mom up in Washington State, and she has, as a sole proprietor, has two kids, a two-year-old son and a 10-year-old, and she's struggled with not being able to send her older one to school. You know, in a sole proprietorship, hard to keep employees in a time like this. So you can believe me that the decisions that I make or contribute to with the governor and the rest of administration are not made in a vacuum.
Well, with that said, suppose you were the parents of small school-age children right now. Would you feel safe to sending them back to school?
I think I would if I saw the plan and could engage in the dialogue with the teachers and with the administration, and I could go kick the tires on the place and say, yeah, this makes sense to me. Again, I understand principles, and I think it's really important that principles, meaning the rules, come from something, and they come from the principles of distancing and whatnot. If I see that those are being applied, and I understand you can't push the risk to zero. I think the ones that are probably feeling the most threatened are the teachers and staff. You know, just because they're the ones I think that worry about their consequences to them personally more than the children, because children they do get really sick with it, and there have been deaths, obviously. But the kids typically do better than the older people. Older meaning, like I said, 18 to 76 were some of the ones we've seen already during the summertime. So, but I think we can get there even with the schools if we do this well.
So if there's one takeaway for our teachers and administrators who are watching, our educators watching, what would that be for them?
I think it would be contribute to the plan and work with your parents to not send sick kids to school. It's amazing how many people, adults even, that go to work or go to events ill. And to me, it's just befuddling to me. So I think teachers participate in the plan and encourage the parents to keep sick kids at home.
Last question I can think of right now, brother. I know you've served in the military.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have a wealth of expertise from a science and doctor perspective. When you look at all those trials and tribulations over the last decades, where does this pandemic rank for you in terms of difficulty?
It is, I think, early on in this pandemic, I just come back in 2018 from a Middle East deployment where I started in 2017. And I came back and I said, well, I'm deploying to Topeka, and it feels just the battle rhythm, it just never ends. I had a grandson visiting these last few days, and the first few days I had to say to myself, okay, let's pretend that I knew how to have fun. What would I do, And fortunately, he came up with some good ideas because it's been hard to have fun. I'm sure everybody that you and everybody you know, saying what's it like? What's it going to take to have fun again? And I think we'll get there, but we've had to do some redefining of that as time has gone on.
Any questions, gentlemen? Anything else you want to add about this?
Oh,
is there anything we're missing in terms of science or the data?
No, I think you've covered it really well, and I see your show all the time, and I think you continuously cover it well. I don't know if that's all your brainchild or if there are people that.
When it comes to intelligence, here's the bar. Here's me.
One of the biggest things I would ask, the couple of things that I took from you was people downplaying it. Don't downplay because that can buckle down. And then you talked about how you're not going to really ever get down to 0% no risk, or 100% no risk.
Right.
In the case zero, I guess if you had to pick 2 or 3 things that you want the public to really take home from your interview today, what do you want them to know?
Yeah.
And talk to him.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking. Yeah, I think the take-homes that I see are really, 1, take this very seriously. 2, you don't have to necessarily commit to 5 years of hard work to make this go away. Really hit it hard now, and because we're at an inflection point, especially with the schools, both K through 12 and higher ed coming back on. Hit it hard now. It'll pay off in a big way. And the third thing is be optimistic. I know it's easy to get down the dumps, but I think if we're all taking care of each other and ourselves, the common good will prevail. I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about.
Anything?